So hoping people are doing all right. It continues to be a roller coaster of mixed emotions, uh, mostly up and down in Israel, here mostly down, I think, for many of us. Um, but it's not a stable time. And while many of the hostages have made it home back to Israel alive, and now many in this large number that were returned of prisoners from Gaza, I understand that many of them were held just for questioning, without they weren't necessarily combatants. I don't know, exactly what's happening, but I do like the idea of the unification of families, and I do like the idea of the cessation of violence right now. There's no war going. We don't know what will happen in the next few days as the ceasefire slowly expires, or quickly expires, I should say. But one thing is certain is that when we study together, we are building bridges and we're creating common language. And I encourage each of us to every day find one thing that we can do that we can say at the end of the day, we did that made another person's life better, easier. Because there's always somebody who's more in need than we are. Um, an interesting thing that we were looking at yesterday is it's not, but because we're doing Proverbs, but what was the term? Um, I'm sorry, give me 1 second. In our study of Proverbs, a, a there's a constant back and forth of is when we create, when we behave in this wisdom tradition, are we keeping, according to the rabbis of the Talmud, we're keeping the Torah. So Torah, wisdom, and and righteousness are kind of interchangeable. And how much does God play in part of all this wonderful advice that we're getting in Proverbs or in wisdom literature in general? And and that has to do with reward and punishment, divine retribution, those kinds of things. But then very often it's presented in such a way that it just seems to be good advice for society, and God's not really in the picture, not directly at least. And I learned, or I relearned, I'd heard it many years ago, a term that was coined in 1952 by a scholar named Koch, or Koch, um, deed consequence nexus. Deed consequence nexus. And it was rephrased in later, I think, in the 90s. And I didn't write down the particular scholar. Fate charged sphere of activity. Fate charged sphere of activity. What I understand from this is that when we learn these lessons, whether they're in this book that we're doing from that are coming out of the character of Jesus, Jesus's mouth, and the lessons that the symbols teach us, and now we're getting into a huge section about which I hope we'll agree that is very symbolic and not historical. We're creating a new world. We're creating a nexus of acting differently, and I don't necessarily mean that the only way to do it is what we're told in the Gospel according to John, or the only way to do it is what we find in the book of Proverbs or in the rabbis. But this idea that it's not karma exactly. My first reaction was, well, this is karma, but karma has to do a lot with other lives, future lives, past lives. It's multi life denominational. I'm talking about this world right here, right now, and how do we bring that light, or how do we bring the kingdom of God for those that use that words, or how do we bring the Mashiach, the time of Mashiach? How do we bring it today in our time, but not through the violent acts of an army which will conquer others, not through the coercion of people to one type of belief, but towards this fixing of society? And I'm not saying anything new. I'm sure we've all thought this and heard this before, but I'm struck by how our little group here has a tiny potential, right? To sow. Yeah. Okay. All right, Steve, any comments, replies to that?
Well, I just think you've stirred up some soul neurons. So yeah, just the I love that. What was it called? Faith charged.
Sorry, I gotta remember, I put it, I should like, write, I should get a tattoo on my arm, right? Um, yeah, deed, consequence, fate, charge, sphere of activity.
Faith charged sphere of activity. That's very interesting. Very, I mean, I like it. Strikes me. um, and then that nexus of righteousness and compassion, which is basically the same thing, correct? I mean,
Yeah, the nexus that the rabbis make is Torah, and not Torah as in the five books of Moses,
as
but
in the way.
yeah, exactly, connected to what we're doing here, right? It's certainly acts, right? The way, but yeah, the nexus between that, between righteousness, yeah,
In wisdom.
and wisdom, yeah, wisdom, yeah, and it's a Venn diagram thing, I think. I don't think they're the same, each one. Anyway, let's get to the beginning of the end. I realized that perhaps that title was insensitive. I hope it wasn't, that I gave the title this page the beginning of the end, because of course it's not the end. It's in many ways it's the beginning. It's the beginning of the beginning, beginning of the new
David,
beginning.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but one more thing.
Yeah.
A faith charged sphere of activity brings wisdom and compassion and righteousness emerges out of that universally, I think. I think that's like a almost a truism. So it just still, my neurons are still bouncing. Sorry, but uh, press on. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, no, not at all. Not at all. Yeah. So whether this is the beginning of the end or whether this is the beginning of the new beginning, um, for the okay, so in the background of what we're going to do today is, of course, this thing that's been hovering all along, is who is writing this and who is it being written for? And Steve has enlightened us many times about this, perhaps a community from Jerusalem that went to someplace else, to Ephenes. Am I pronouncing that correctly? And then maybe a group that left the synagogue, maybe a group that left that group. It seems to be constantly split. It's a little bit hard for me to keep track. And I'm often skeptical when scholars will tell us, well, this was the historical background of something that was written 2,000 years ago. But I do see it as a foundation of what Bishop Spong writes. And I wanted to ask you, as a general question going forward, this historical background that's assumed that you've spoken of many times, Steve, where do we know that from? What are the sources, the documents, the sources? Is it implied from the text here in John, or do we know it from Paul's writing? Not so much from Paul. I don't think it's from Paul's writing, but where do we know all this information from?
Of the arrest and death.
No, 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 no. The background of the splitting of the community, this
Oh,
in the synagogue, and what happens in Ephesus and Ephesus. What are our sources?
well, I think you just the sources of the whole historical narrative.
Yeah, when Spong says with full confidence, this is what's happening, and I'm saying this now because Spong, and I want to follow this as we go in the next chapter, says that each of the characters that are developed here in the narrative symbolize something that was happening in reality at the end of the first century in amongst these people. And my big question is, he does there's no footnotes, right, in his book. So where do we know this from? When you say, Steve, when you've told us about the community splitting and leaving the synagogue and leaving, and then the group leaving them or staying with that, where do you know this from other than the intro to New Testament that you had? I mean, it,
Well, I mean, going back to Shaye Cohen, who lost his wife, I believe you
yeah,
said.
Yeah.
Uh, Going back to that class in 1988, there's just a lot of sources. Well, I mean, there's the old Josephus, his historian, who New Testament theologians try to correlate with bits of papyri and writings. But I think at the end of the day, the idea is that there was this experience in history, and it made huge impact within Judaism, and and that impact rippled out into all kinds of places and ways, and it invited lots of pushback, and it was a volatile time. But the theory is that those experiences were then passed on orally, they were passed on in bits of papyri, writings, and that the community, and there were communities by the time the document of what we have in, let's say, the Gospel of Mark, which I still maintain was late 60s, mid 60s, before the temple was destroyed. But, Mark and his community in Rome, by then he collects and puts it together. And then comes the community of Luke, and of course, Paul, who was historical in the early days, and Luke in the book of Acts tries to tell Paul's story, and then scholars try to relate that to his letters. But at the end of the day, these are interpretations of that historical time. It impacts people differently. And then it wasn't until, let's say, the canonization of the scriptures, again, few centuries later, and the idea in the Christian faith that all that we have is inspired by the Holy Spirit, that gets interpreted. And the early Greek fathers, if you will, interpreted it very analogically or symbolically. And then it's not until after the Enlightenment and a new way of thinking about truth, more as rationality, that notions of the Bible being infallible or inerrant. And so whatever it says is God's truth. And so you know what I'm saying? And then comes the Jesus seminar that tries to think critically about that. And I don't know if I'm answering your question, but
Okay. Let's say maybe it wasn't, this may not be the right place for it now, because the truth is we are really dealing with the text directly.
right.
And
And I like your approach to just treat it as a narration, a narrative, that we take it as it is in this case. There's background information and thoughts and ideas that illuminate it and help us. But uh, I think if we just take it as given, then that'll open up stuff to talk about.
okay, but the only thing I'll respond to that, take it as given, is that I think that it seems to me it'll be easier for us if we don't look at this as an historical account going forward, that we
Correct.
understand that the tone was set by the author, the editor of this book from the beginning, that this is not about what happened, but about lessons that are taught through stories of actions. And just because there is parallel to this to the chapters going forward in the synoptic gospels, doesn't mean that I don't think I, I'm not drawn into making comparisons to try to figure out who's right about it, because it's being used very symbolically. I think that's my
Oh, in that sense, I see what you were asking. Yeah, I think again, we've talked about this. What we have now is like the fifth edit, and each edit is an interpretation in a particular time in history, correct? That then reflects that period, whether this is in, let's say, 90 or even later. Uh, Yes, it reflects the community that's now rooted around Jesus as Lord, as Messiah. It's the community that has been pushed out of Judaism. And that's a tragic story. But on the other hand, it's a historical reality that now they're trying to wrestle with that contemporary situation. And who are they? What does it mean to be in Jesus now and a Jew? And
Mm.
so it raises all those uh, questions. Ajit?
I think the Gospels are of faith, about faith, regarding faith. The art of history, the modern way we write history, like Will and Ariel Durant, these are not historical books. We can't use them to say these are historical facts. These are facts about our faith, your faith, my faith. They're not history. No holy book, no scripture can be seen as the splitting of the Jordan, or with people being able to, all these things are about faith, not about history. To take them as history is to go down the wrong path, I think.
I hear that.
Okay.
Don,
So,
you
oh, Don.
follow up?
Yeah. Um, I don't really know how to respond because I'll take a shot at this. Some of the characters in the gospel are historical characters. The high priest, the Roman Empire, the locations of Bethany and Jerusalem and um, uh, the Jordan. Um, I think what scholars do is spend time making connections between that which was put forth in the Hebrew scriptures and using them to bring some kind of a point in the Christian scriptures. So my sense is that this is more historical than what I'm hearing in the discussion.
Yeah, I would agree that it's rooted in history. And I would go hitchhike on Ajit's comment that, like in John's gospel, I see it as an inside out telling, interpretation that is deeply spiritually, and
Yeah.
spiritual is it, Spong calls it from another dimension, or he's talking about not the kingdom of this world, but the kingdom of heaven. And so I agree that even as John's community called the first half the book of signs, literally the book of parables, the book of symbols through which we get universal insight. And now we're moving into what is called the book of glory. It's the visible manifestation in history of the deepest meaning of what those signs hinted at.
Okay, let's dive into it then. Don, you want to read beginning the first paragraph 1 through 11?
Sure. After Jesus had spoken these words, he went out with his disciples across the Kidron Valley to a place where there was a garden, which he and his disciples entered. Now Judas, who betrayed him, also knew the place, because Jesus often met there with his disciples. So Judas brought a detachment of soldiers together with police from the chief priests and the Pharisees, and they came with lanterns and torches and weapons. Then Jesus, knowing all that was to happen to him, came forward and asked them, "Whom are you looking for?" They answered, "Jesus of Nazareth." Jesus replied, I am he. Judas, who betrayed him, was standing with them. When Jesus said to them, I am he, they stepped back and fell to the ground. Again, he asked them, whom are you looking for? And they said, Jesus of Nazareth. Jesus answered, I told you that I am he. So if you are looking for me, let these people go. This was to fulfill the word that he had spoken. I did not lose a single one of those whom you gave me. Then Simon Peter, who had a sword, drew it and struck the high priest's slave and cut off his right ear. The slave's name was Malchus. Jesus said to Peter, put your sword back into its sheath. Am I not to drink the cup that the Father has given me?
Okay. First stab at reactions, Don?
Yeah, I think I'm seeing a picture here where this person is in full control of the situation, even though he has either a sense or foreknowledge that he was in deep trouble. I think the idea of Peter striking the ear always intrigued me. I think Peter was going for the head, but he missed.
I think the very notion of a fisherman like Peter carrying a sword is incongruous. I mean, it doesn't make any sense that a farmer fisherman who's following a rabbi, a teacher, would be carrying a sword. It's just,
This supports what Don says. That's why he missed. He's a fisherman. What's he doing with a sword?
no, but the very fact of him having a sword is incongruous.
Well, they had to clean the fish, as you
Yeah, well, maybe. The verse 3. So Judas brought a detachment of soldiers with police from the chief priests and the Pharisees. I don't know. I mean, I know the temple clergy had their own police. I don't see that the Pharisees would have their police. They wouldn't. I mean, Pharisees.
Historians point out that's not a historical.
Pharisees operate as individuals.
Well, they may have operated as a group, but they weren't a group with any particular power at this time.
No, they were not.
But okay, anyway, but taking the story as what it's telling us, not about the history but what's the mess? So there's some wonderful opportunities for message making here. Yeah, the sword, fisherman maybe with the sword. I hadn't thought about that he was a fisherman. The ear symbolic of it. I'm looking at the drinking.
You cut off someone's ear, it's going to create a bloody mess.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, they put a Band-Aid on it. It sounds like why is there no follow-up on that?
He held up his ear and said, fight, fight, fight.
Right, and then he won the election. Yeah. How about the cup that Jesus says, I've got to drink the cup that the Father has given me? Any thoughts on that?
I think that relates to up earlier. He said, then Jesus, knowing all that was to happen to him, and that I think ties with, I think Don said he's in control of this situation. He knows what's happening here. And that's what struck me. It said that earlier, and then, am I not to drink the cup the Father has given me? So he's aware of what's ahead, that they were coming for him.
And it's got to play out.
Yeah.
There's a verse in Isaiah 51, rouse yourself, arise, O Jerusalem, you who from the Lord's hand have drunk the cup of God's wrath. You who have drained to the dregs the bowl, the cup of reeling. Not sure it's connected. There is at least one commentator who feels that that might be in the background here. Don?
Yeah, it was that what you just read just illustrates how I feel connections are made from the Hebrew scriptures and brought forward into this redaction or this composition.
Right.
I think that's, and the other side of our paper, I think, goes on to talk about the Babylonian Talmud, which has a bunch of them in there as well.
Right. So I guess you're talking about perhaps the connections, the strong connections between literary culture. How do we create literature, and how the intertextuality that's used, and yeah, the fact that so much of the New Testament goes on the same, using the same devices, the same formats as rabbinic literature. Yeah.
Those are good points. That's helpful.
And
Thank
when
you.
you compare this gospel to the other three in the New Testament, this is markedly different, right? In the earlier gospels, Jesus is sweat and blood. Take this cup away from me, and here he is in control. It's almost like he is running the show, even though they've got all the power, earthly power. And so when he says, I am he, and you remember this goes back to the early chapter, the prologue, where the light extinguishes the darkness, or the shadows are absorbed by light. And so they come with their lights. It's dark, obviously. And then they ask, whom are you seeking? And then, of course, the Greek text does not have he. It just says ego eimi, meaning I am, which of course goes back to the Mosaic response at the burning bush. And so when they fall back, there's the story, the writers want us to feel that Jesus is calling the shots as the divine one who has the more power than they can even imagine.
I have a
This
question.
is the most detailed gospel of the four.
In terms of this period,
Just of all the stories, there's so much detail in this gospel. It's surprising compared to the small pericopes in the other gospels.
and typically those details trigger a Hebraic or a Jewish idea in the background that they're either using to corroborate or to trigger that for the first century or second century reader.
Who fell down?
It looks like a they, when Jesus, whoever they,
Did the disciples fall down, or did the soldiers fall down?
it doesn't say, it just says they. I think.
My understanding was it's the soldiers who are perhaps bowing, not
Yeah,
falling.
and you're right. It's not that they fell to the ground. It's almost like a prayer
Oh, they
posture.
bowed would be a better.
Yes. Thank you, David, for that.
Struck me how this passage sort of went out of the way to emphasize Judas and his betrayal. And there's this conflict between Jesus and the chief priests and the Pharisees. And in the middle of that conflict is this betrayal. Judas is the sort of the crossover guy. He was just with Jesus for the last 3 years, and it's emphasized in here. And it just made me think of, what role does betrayal play in so many conflicts?
I love that question. And David, It's been a while since I've read Spong's book, but what does he do with Judas here? Do you remember there's something?
Yeah, he's got a chapter. I mean, I only got through half of the chapter and I got
But it's
sidetracked.
like Judas represents Judah
Yeah.
symbolically as the Christians, Jewish Christians who had been forced out of their Judaism. They Judas, I think functions in this narrative as the Jews who have pushed them away and betrayed.
No, I actually think
Something
maybe I
like-
remember that it's the Jews that came back. Some Jews had second thoughts and came back to the synagogue. That's why I was asking about the sources. It seems rather intricate and he speaks with confidence, but yeah,
Yeah, some left and never to come back. Some tried to have it both ways. Some just gave up on the Christian piece and just stayed with their tradition.
No.
but let's look at it the way it is though. The
They know
story
to
the way
what?
it is.
I think if you read the next verse, you'll find that Judas had an awfully good reason for doing what he did. In that every time, and Jesus was not the first one to call himself the Messiah, but every time somebody called himself the Messiah, the Romans would send legions of soldiers into Judah to kill and maim and rape and burn things down. And Judas, here, it seems to me, is trying to save as many Jews as possible by betraying Jesus. If you read the next paragraph, that's the sense I get.
So go ahead, read the next paragraph.
All right. So the soldiers, the officers, and the Jewish police arrested Jesus and bound him. First, they took him to Annas, who was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, the high priest that year. Caiaphas was the one who had advised the Jews that it was better to have one person die for the people. And in that's what I'm reading into it, that if one person, Jesus, dies, is arrested and goes away, then the Romans will not send their legions into Judah to kill and maim. It's better for one person to die than for the armies to come in and kill a whole bunch of people and burn down the villages and towns, which is what they did when the other two declared themselves to be the Messiah.
Does anybody feel a connection between the story of Isaac and Jesus here?
Why here as opposed to other parts, Don? What's raising you? What's reminding you right here?
Well, it's God's only son was brought to be sacrificed. He was killed, but he was raised up, just like Isaac escaped from being killed by his father. I'm just saying there's a feel of similarity here for me.
So about the whole story, not just this particular paragraph. Yeah.
Yeah.
It seems to me that I've seen Megan and Rita Claire over in the last half hour, various facial expressions. But so I want to give them an opportunity. Is there something either one of you wanted to say about this section or in general? About the fisherman with the sword or something like that? I don't know. Or did I misread your faces?
I'm just listening.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's good.
Because there's no women in this paragraph, so we want to bring in the woman's voice.
Either, I can't, may be terrible, but what I know of the Jesus story is from Jesus Christ Superstar. So whenever we're reading this, I think of the different characters. So if my face looks funny, sometimes I'm thinking of a song or anyway. I haven't said that throughout this whole discussion, but
Beautiful, beautiful.
You know, when you opened up and asked for a song, the first thing that came to my mind was Godspell.
I don't know how to love you. Rita Claire, sorry, Rita Claire, anything? No, okay. And Sue, you got anything? Okay, good. Well, we want to make sure that we, all right. So Wayne, you want to bring us forward with, oh, I'm sorry, Harold, thank you. Go ahead.
No, just very briefly, I wanted to sort of just second what Ajit said earlier in terms of the rebellions. I have read somewhere, and I can't, it was some time ago, and I can't cite a source for it or anything, that there were rebellions or maybe mini rebellions or something like that going on at the time, and that what the Romans would do is go in and slaughter a lot of people. And Caiaphas may have been in the position of, you know, I can sacrifice this one guy, you know, this one guy, and just to get the Romans off the backs of, you know, a lot of other people.
Okay.
So anyway, but I have heard that.
And it's an important thought, because there were these you know, the whole zealot movement was based on getting Rome out, and so there's a book I've got called False Messiahs, and it tells the story of numerous efforts to lead, and yet most of them, or I guess all of them, were violent. And that distinguishes this Messiah, this so-called Messiah at the time, from the more, as we'll see in his confrontation with Pilate.
Yeah.
Okay, so Wayne, you want to take us forward from 15?
Certainly. Simon Peter and another disciple followed Jesus. Since that disciple was known to the high priest, he went with Jesus into the courtyard of the high priest. But Peter was standing outside at the gate. So the other disciple, who was known to the high priest, went out, spoke to the woman who guarded the gate, and brought Peter in. The woman said to Peter, "You are not also one of the man's disciples, are you?" He said, "I am not." Now the slaves and the police had made a charcoal fire because it was cold, and they were standing around it and warming themselves. Peter was also standing with them and warming himself.
Doesn't work.
Any reactions? What does this add to our,
Uh,
or do we need more text first?
was a woman guarding the gate? Was that a normal thing? I mean, considering the times, the notion of a woman guarding the gates doesn't work for me.
Unless you want to say something about Jesus and women.
No. It makes no sense because most of the time the guards are soldiers or men, strong men guarding the gate. Anyway.
But if you don't assume that this is a reflection of a historical account, but you do look for it as a story in which it's in some ways almost like a parable. It's not a parable, but a symbolic story. Then what would be the message in having
Maybe
this?
they were just there hanging out looking to find a husband
Or maybe smoking a cigarette. Yeah.
or a joint.
Yeah.
Please be respectful, Richard.
And the other thing that doesn't work is that it was cold and they were outside warming themselves. If the assumption is the crucifixion and resurrection happened around March-April time frame, it's not very cold. This seems like almost a winter story. I'm sorry.
I think we should read to the end of 27.
Okay.
Give it a whole unit. So
Good.
Wayne,
So,
mind
Wayne,
reading the next 2 paragraphs?
Certainly. By the way, I would comment to Ajit's comment. March in the desert at night when it's 50 is really cold, for those of you who experience the desert. Then the high priest questioned Jesus about his disciples and about his teaching. Jesus answered, I have spoken openly to the world. I've always taught in synagogues and in the temple, where all the Jews come together. I have said nothing in secret. Why do you ask me? Ask those who heard what I said to them, that they know what I said. When he had said this, one of the police standing nearby struck Jesus on the face, saying, "Is that how you answer the high priest?" Jesus answered, "If I have spoken wrongly, testify to the wrong, but if I have spoken rightly, why do you strike me?" And then Annas said to send him bound to Caiaphas the high priest. Now Simon Peter was standing and warming himself to ask him, "You are not one of the disciples, are you?" He denied it and said, "I am not." One of the slaves of the high priest, a relative of the man whose ear Peter had cut off, asked, "Did I not see you in the garden with him?" Again, Peter denied it, and at that moment the cock crowed.
So back to, let's start with the woman for a second, because that perturbed people, I think. It turns out that in the parallels in Synoptic Gospels, a woman is present in the accounts of Peter denying. So a woman has to be there, and that's a way to put a woman in the picture. No, nothing more than to say, this is part of the overall, we're retelling the story, but we're moving around the pieces, and the pieces are all there. And one of the pieces, of course, the main part of this piece is for Peter to say at the time of the cocking of the rooster, that he denies. Another part of this is Jesus saying, I think, this is not about me. This is about the message, and this is about the people that heard it and the followers. Why don't you talk to them? In other words, I'm not the issue here. I'm not the problem. The problem is, or the thing is. So that's how I can get through this without, without worrying too much about the. By the way, the issue of the sword, we're thinking of a large sword. That word can also mean stiletto, dagger. So, and that's something, as I think Don said, you need to gut the fish at some point, right? Yeah. So what I'm going to suggest we go ahead and read through the end. And then to the end of this chapter, and then we'll kind of see where we stand with things. Want to continue, Wayne? Did such a good.
Let me have a little water first. Spring allergies are kicking in. Then they took Jesus from Caiaphas to Pilate's headquarters. It was early in the morning. They themselves did not enter the headquarters so as to avoid ritual defilement and to be able to eat the Passover. So Pilate went out to them and said, "What accusation do you bring against this man?" He answered, "If this man were not a criminal, we would not have handed him over to you." Pilate said to them, "Take yourselves and judge him according to your law." The Jews replied, "We are not permitted to put anyone to death." That was to fulfill what Jesus had said when he indicated the kind of death he was to die. Then Pilate entered the headquarters again, summoned Jesus, and asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus answers, "Do you ask this on your own, or did others tell you about me?" Pilate replied, "I am not a Jew, am I? It's your own nation and the chief priests have handed you over to me. What have you done?" Jesus answered, "My kingdom does not belong to this world. If my kingdom belonged to this world, my followers would be fighting to keep me from being handed over to the Jews. But as it is said, my kingdom is not from here." Pilate asked him, "So you are a king?" Jesus answered, "You say that I am a king. For this I was born, and for this I came into the world, to testify to the truth. Everyone belongs to the truth, listens to my voice." Pilate asked him, "What is truth?" After he said this, he went out to the Jews again and told them, "I find no case against him, but you have a custom that I release someone for you at Passover. Do you want me to release for the king of the Jews?" They shouted in reply, "Not this man, but Barabbas." Now Barabbas was a rebel.
Okay.
For me, I see a couple of things. One goes back to when Peter says, I am not, just before Jesus says, I am. So there's a clash of kingdoms that is starting to develop here. And the clash is between the world's powers, political, religious, whatever that may be, and this kingdom that is not of this world. And so this clash of kingdoms helps make sense of Peter's denial for me. You know, don't you know this guy? And Peter keeps denying it, even though before he was ready to give his life as a loyal bodyguard, which is what a bodyguard would do in the kingdom of this world, correct? And so when Jesus is arrested and he doesn't fight, I think Peter really did not know him. I mean, I think existentially, it's like, I don't get it. You know, I don't know this guy. And so then comes this clash of political, religious hierarchies, right? And this is a very structured, hierarchical first century culture, the chain of great being. And so Jesus is being crushed by those powers. And so it sets up what I think John is trying to get at when he ends with the truth. Everyone who belongs to the truth listens to my voice. So it goes back to that internal, inside out understanding of what I would go back to is wisdom, compassion, righteousness that is universal. And that's why I loved when David gave us the Talmud Sanhedrin, that piece from Psalm 95, if you will listen to his voice. So again, this is trying to transcend these religious political distinctions and get in touch with the best of the traditions. Harold?
Just in going over the conversation or debate, I guess, between Jesus and Pilate, I think they're, as it's been said before, they're kind of speaking at two different levels. I don't think Pilate would have had the foggiest idea what Jesus was talking about. I don't think he would have understood when he said, my kingdom is not of this world. I don't think Pilate would have had any idea what he was talking about. From what I've read, now this is getting a little historical, I guess, but from what I've read, Pilate was an incredibly cruel man, ruled with an iron fist. That's all he knew. He may have, the day before Jesus died, he may have crucified several people the day before. He may have crucified several people the day after. It just, you know, anything that reeks of sedition or anything like that, he, you know, I don't know. I just don't know how this conversation could have happened, and I don't know how Pilate could have had the least understanding of what Jesus was talking about.
Harold, I think those are really good comments. I think partly the gospel wants to show without a doubt Jesus's innocence, right? That Pilate keeps saying, I don't see the problem. And you're correct in that Pilate would have it's just another day at the office for him, right?
Yeah.
But then the release of Barabbas, which of course is that you know, the son of Abba, of God. So there's an irony being juxtaposed here. This is a very elegant literary composition, isn't it? I mean, it's working these two levels into
Yeah.
something that has value.
I wanted to ask David, you started to smile when I was in the middle of my talking.
Don't you, how long have you been together, Harold? When are you gonna listen to your rabbi when the rabbi says, don't take it historically?
I'll take it. I know.
You're supposed to listen to your rabbi. I'm only talking to the Orami bride.
But still,
Christians don't have to listen to me.
okay, but still, now, let's say it's all fantasy. I still don't see how. Yeah, I don't get from this that Pilate was understanding what Jesus was talking about.
And I think that's a good that's a good observation. Absolutely.
Right, which is what I had said.
Which means the Romans don't understand what we're talking, what we've been talking about. They don't get it. I
Yeah.
think. Don, you're bubbling in your chair there.
No, I can't help myself. I'm sorry. I think Pilate was more concerned about the situation of the population. He's worrying who's going to screw him next by this conflicting group of people. He was more worried about what the Jews were thinking and all those people that came to visit him here, and the idea of understanding what Jesus's problem was way beyond him at this moment.
Yeah, I think he just wanted to get back to the poker game with the boys. Should we take a look at the little bit of time we have with this section from? We've seen part of this before. I'm pretty sure I brought it in this context. If not now, then maybe it was in when we studied Acts together. But in this section of Sanhedrin, which is a tractate in the Talmud, based on the Mishnah that was edited in the beginning of the 3rd century, and then discussed in oral form over hundreds of years until, we don't have an exact date when it was edited, but let's say until 600 or so. But this is earlier material based on the names and the language that's used as well. So Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi said to Elijah, when will the Mashiach come? Eliyahu said to him, go ask him. Right? You free access to Mashiach. Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi said, and where is he sitting? And Eliyahu said to him, at the entrance of the city of Rome. Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi asked him, and what is his identifying sign by means of which I can recognize him? Eliyahu answered, he sits among the poor who suffer from illness, and all of them untie their bandages and tie them all at once. But the Mashiach unties one bandage and ties one at a time. He says, perhaps I will be needed to serve to bring about redemption. In other words, Mashiach's always ready to come. Therefore, I will never tie more than one bandage so that I will not be delayed. Another tradition about Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi went to the Mashiach. He said to the Mashiach, greetings to you, my rabbi, Mori v'Rabbi, my rabbi and my teacher. The Messiah said to him, greetings to you, Bar Levi. Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi said to him, when will the master come? The Messiah said to him, today. Sometime later, Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi came to Elijah. Elijah said to him, what did the Mashiach say to you? He said to Elijah that the Messiah said, greetings, shalom to you, Bar Levi, which is, Levi, anyway. And Elijah said to him, he thereby guaranteed that you and your father will enter the world to come, as he greeted you with shalom. Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi said to Elijah, the Messiah lied to me, as he said to me, I'm coming today, and he did not come. Elijah said to him that this is what he said to you. He said that he will come today if, emphasizing, you will listen to his voice. Rabbi Yosef ben Kisma's students asked him, when will the son of David come? Ben David, Mashiach ben David. Rabbi Yosef said to him, I'm hesitant to answer you lest you request from me a sign to corroborate my statement. They said to him, we're not asking you for a sign. Rabbi Yosef said to them, you will see when this existing gate of Rome falls and will be rebuilt, and will fall a second time and will be rebuilt, and will fall a third time. And they will not manage to rebuild it until the son of David comes. The student said to him, Our rabbi, give us a sign. Rabbi Yossi said to them, but didn't you say to me that you're not asking me for a sign? And that's the end of the story. And Rabbi Yochanan comments on that. The son of David will come only in a generation that is entirely innocent, in which case they will be deserving of redemption, or in a generation that is entirely guilty, in which case there will be no alternative to redemption. He may come in a generation that is entirely innocent, as it is written, and your people also shall all be righteous. They shall inherit the land forever. And he may come in a generation that is entirely guilty, another proof text, and he saw that there was no man and was astonished that there was no intercessor. Therefore, his arm brought salvation to him, and his righteousness, it sustained him. And it is written, for my own sake I will do it. For how should it be profaned? And my glory I will not give it to another. If they merit redemption, this is the final line of this particular section. If they merit redemption through repentance and good deeds, I will hasten the coming of the Messiah. If they do not merit redemption, the coming of the Messiah will be in its designated time, which we don't know. The reason that I brought this is that here's another version, a different version that's kind of talking about the same thing. It's part of this. I didn't have to bring it in this particular chapter, could have brought it at the end of our section, but I was looking for something to fill up the page. So we, good use of 2 pages or 2 sides of a page. But this idea that there's this expectation of redemption, and the question is why not? Why hasn't it not come? And what's encapsulated in our story in this chapter is this combination of people who I think symbolically represent the people of the time, where some people were in, some people were out, and some people were on the fence, like Peter's on the fence in one way. And in some ways, I'd like to judge Judas as also being on the fence. Right? He tried it, he was in there and decided not to. I don't see Jesus, when I read this, I don't see Jesus as a satanic person, right? There just to mess things up. See somebody who was there, he was part of the group, and he decided for whatever reasons, it's not me. Either he's symbolizing that kind of desire for personal gain that an individual has, although that's not emphasized here so much. It is in the other Gospels. But Peter, for me, is not a sign of weakness. Peter, for me, is a reality check. That a lot of people just don't know. And when push comes to shove, they say, you know what? I'm gonna we see it now in society. We see now with people saying, maybe I shouldn't be so vocal about what I feel. I don't know. That's how I see it. And that's why I brought this section.
Nice.
Okay. I didn't mean to have the last word there, but if anybody would like to question or comment.
Great parallel. Thanks for that.
Okay, everyone. Well, may this week see some improvement in the world, and may that redemption come a little bit closer. And not because we all deserve to be, because it's so atrocious we need redemption, but because it's the time. All right, everybody. Be well. Thank you.